The Subcommittee on Early Childhood, Elementary, and Secondary Education will come to order. I note that a quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to call recess at any time. For generations, sports have served an important role in building the character of America's youth, keeping kids active and teaching important lessons in perseverance, discipline, and teamwork. Today, fewer kids are getting these foundational skills from youth sports. 70% of children now quit organized sports by age 13. This decline will have a negative effect on their long-term development and broader economic and societal consequences for the nation. Part of the decline stems from the increased commercialization of youth sports. In 2024, the average U.S. sports family spent more than $1,000 on its child's primary sport, a 46% increase since 2019. In total, the youth sports industry generates more than $40 billion in annual revenue. But this revenue comes at a steep cost to families. Parents are told that only year-round travel teams, private coaching, and early specialization will keep their child competitive and maybe even earn them a scholarship. That false promise has created a spending surge that prices out the average family, while pushing kids as young as 8 into high-cost, high-pressure programs that simply aren't necessary for long-term development. Private equity firms are now pouring billions into youth sports facilities, tournaments, and leagues, further fueling exorbitant spending. As programs get more expensive, fewer kids have access to affordable opportunities in their own communities to learn important life skills and to try new things. This leaves millions of kids losing the very benefits sports are supposed to deliver. Inactive youth feel negatively about themselves at nearly double the rate of youth who are active. The broader consequences of declining participation are stark. Today, 1 in 3 youth ages 10 to 17 are overweight or obese. Medical expenses associated with obesity alone cost taxpayers $173 billion a year, with lifetime costs for today's obese youth projected to exceed $1 trillion. Meanwhile, on average, children spend nearly 8 hours a day on screens. And for kids who don't participate in extracurricular activities, it's roughly 2 additional hours every day. Excessive screen time is linked to obesity, depression, anxiety, and reduced self-esteem. What we are witnessing is more than a drop in sports participation. It is the loss of one of the most effective tools we have to combat rising isolation and mental health challenges in our children. When children lose regular in-person team activities, they lose daily opportunities to build confidence, belonging, and real-world social connection. But here's the good news. We already have a national target to turn this around. The Healthy People 2030 goal, administered by the Department of Health and Human Services, calls for 63% youth sports participation by 2030. It's the first ever national benchmark to promote physical activity and child development for America's youth. Achieving it would require about 3 million more kids to participate in sports and would result in $80 billion in savings from reduced medical costs and lost productivity, plus millions of additional quality years of life for America's youth. That is why we are here today, to shine a national spotlight on youth sports, the critical role they play in America's future, and how increasing participation can save billions in healthcare costs and improve millions of lives. I'm looking forward to today's hearing. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for your participation, and with that, I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. I also look forward to this hearing today. Whether it's t-ball, track, and field, baseball, lacrosse, soccer, football, hockey, swimming, or figure skating, or anything I left out. We know that participating in sports has long-term benefits for young people, their families, and their communities. Studies show that participating in youth sports improves mental and physical health, lowers stress, heightens self-esteem, fosters social skills, improves academic outcomes, sparks collaboration, joy, and more. More than 60 million children participate in youth sports in the United States annually. Sports have long been an avenue for all children to come together regardless of socioeconomic status, but the playing field is increasingly a pay-to-play industry, accessible more only to the wealthy. According to the Aspen Institute, who we'll hear from today, the youth sports industry generates, as the chairman said, more than $40 billion in revenue every year. That's more than the revenue of the NFL. The New York Times reported that in 2024, the average family spent more than $1,500 on their child's sports. And as the cost of living continues to rise, working families must juggle skyrocketing healthcare costs, housing costs, groceries, and more. And on top of this, families are now facing exorbitant fees and costs associated with team registrations, travel, lodging, equipment, and apparel. This enormous financial barrier to entry can and does prohibit families from enrolling their child in these important activities. Youth sports used to be local recreational activities, but in recent years, we've seen this cherished pastime be consumed by corporate interests that put profit over play. Increasingly, private equity firms are taking advantage of families by buying up and consolidating training programs and leagues and then setting sky-high prices. These private equity firms can drive up prices because they know that parents who can will try and will sacrifice to give their children the best opportunities and a chance to succeed. But the gap is widening. Fewer children will have access to the benefits that come with participating in youth sports. And we heard about that from the chairman, and I know we'll hear about that from the witnesses. With youth sports, it shouldn't matter where you grew up or how much money your family has. It matters how much you try and learn and what you can do on the field. But increasingly, that's not the case. In many ways, the takeover of youth sports by private equity exemplifies problems we see throughout today's economy. Healthcare costs are already high and climbing, in part because private equity firms are buying up hospitals, knowing that consumers don't have a choice in whether they receive necessary medical care. Private equity firms have swooped into childcare and housing, often making everyday life more expensive without improving quality. After all, when you have a few entities that own and control everything in an industry, there's nothing stopping them from increasing prices and tacking on fees. We want to give all students the best shot to succeed. For millions of families, this means access to high-quality extracurricular and community-based programs like arts, music, dance, and of course, sports. And unfortunately, the local organizations, school-based programs, and nonprofit organizations that once made up the youth sports scene have long been underfunded. Many community-based sports programs never recovered from the Great Recession and the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly in lower-income communities. This chronic lack of local investment has given private equity firms and big corporations the opportunity to get in and hike prices. Then, to make matters worse, the Trump administration is making it more difficult for youth sports to remain accessible. The budget for fiscal year 2026 includes nearly $4 billion in cuts to national parks and recreation areas. And recent funding cuts and the termination of public education programs will further contribute to the lack of accessible sports programs for children. And the Trump administration has done nothing to rein in private equity, curb corporate greed, or protect consumers. The majority of Americans live in a country where the economy doesn't work for them. And despite the president's claims, the Americans people know that the affordability crisis is no hoax. Youth sports are a small but critical part of this affordability crisis. All children, no matter their socioeconomic status, deserve to have every opportunity to pursue their dreams, nurture their talents, and create lifelong memories on the field, the court, or the rink. Although private or corporate funding may have a small role to play, it's not a substitute for sustainable and local federal investment. We must do our part to foster that local investment, to prevent monopolization, and promote access to sports for every child and every family, not just the wealthy and the well-connected. And Mr. Chairman, that being said, I want to note that the title of this committee hearing refers to the, quote, the crisis in American youth sports. As important as sports participation is for kids, there's also a much more pressing crisis at hand that the majority needs to recognize. According to Education Week, there have been 17 K-12 school shootings in 2025. There have been more than 150 shootings in the past 5 years. We know what happened over the weekend. This doesn't even include shootings at high institutes of higher education. Just this weekend, 2 students were killed and 9 others injured at a mass shooting at Brown University. The shooter is still at large. At least a couple of the students at the university have previously survived mass shootings at their high schools, and Sunday was the 13th year anniversary of the Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre. The subcommittee has held several hearings this year, but we have not had a single hearing related to gun violence. We've not marked up a single bill that will make students safer from gun violence. We can talk about the other issues as much as we want: math, reading, CTE, screen time, student privacy, and sports, and none of that matters if children are shot and killed. So I urge my colleagues in the majority to make it a priority in 2026 to address the real and ongoing crisis of gun violence in schools. It's not an issue we can afford to ignore. Kids are counting on you. I do look forward to this hearing today, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, all members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m. 14 days after this hearing. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days to allow such statements and other extraneous material noted during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. I'll now introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. Tom Ferry, the Executive Director for the Sports and Society Program at the Aspen Institute from SubCmte, California. Our second witness is Mr. Steve Boyle, the co-founder and Executive Director of 241 Sports from Hartford, Connecticut. Our third witness is Ms. Catherine Van Dyke, a senior fellow at the American Economic Liberties Project from Washington, D.C. And our fourth witness is Mr. John O'Sullivan, the Chief Executive Officer of Changing the Game Project from Bend, Oregon. We thank our witnesses for being here today and look forward to your testimony. Pursuant to committee rules, I would ask that you each limit your oral presentation to a 3-minute summary of your written statement. As committee members have many questions for you, the clock will count down from 3 minutes. However, pursuant to Committee Rule 8D and committee practice, we will not cut off your testimony until you reach the 5-minute mark. I would also like to remind the witnesses to be aware of your responsibility to provide accurate information to the subcommittee. I will first recognize Mr. Ferry for your testimony.
There we go. Chair Kiley, Ranking Member Bonamici, and members of the committee, thank you so much for inviting me to testify on the crisis in youth sports. My name is Tom Ferry, and I lead the Sports and Society program at the Aspen Institute. Our signature initiative is called Project Play, which works with many leading organizations in sports to develop insights, ideas, and opportunities to build healthy communities through sports. I'd like to talk to you today not about my goals or those of the organizations that sit at the center of Project Play, but your goals and our goals as Americans, those of Healthy People 2030, the nation's plan to address our most critical public health challenges. 8 years ago, an interagency group led by HHS began to capture data from the National Children's Health Survey on the percentage of youth ages 6 to 17 who were playing sports, 58%. And they set a target by 2030, a 10% lift to 63%. We at the Aspen Institute took that as a call to action for the private sector and the nonprofit sectors to step up. So Project Play created a roundtable of 20 leading organizations that would show the way. Leagues like the NBA and Major League Baseball, Nike and Under Armour, ESPN and NBC Sports, the top registration platforms, competitors in many cases, rallying around an opportunity that will lift all boats, getting and keeping more children playing sports. We call this effort 63 by 30 and developed the value proposition. We worked with HHS and university researchers to publish a peer-reviewed study in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine showing that if we can hit the 63% target by 2030, the nation will derive at least $80 billion in social benefits and direct medical cost savings and worker productivity gains alone. That's because active kids become more active adults. This cohort of today's youth alone will enjoy 1.8 million more QYL, or quality years of life. And that's only scratching the surface on the benefits. If you played sports as a kid, and I know many of you did, you know what you learned: resilience, teamwork, creativity, leadership, how to compete hard and within the rules while respecting your opponent. All essential skills in life and the traits we need as Americans to make our country and our democracy better, to make it work. So I commend you. I really commend you for calling this hearing. There's been a lot of talk on the Hill about what to do with college sports, but youth and school sports is the largest and most important layer of our sport ecosystem, the foundation upon which everything else sits. Not just college and pro sports and the Olympic sports, but really the vitality of our nation. You recognize what the original advocates of youth sports figured out at the start of the 20th century, that sport is a tool of nation building and personal development. President Teddy Roosevelt used the White House pulpit to promote as much. Muscular Christians saw sport as an agent of moral development, so they invented games like basketball and volleyball. Child savers liked the health benefits. Military recruiters viewed sports as a way to build soldiers. Captains of industry like the Carnegies and the Rockefellers saw sport as a model for capitalism with its sorting of winners and losers. So they introduced interscholastic sports, the playground movement, which got thousands of parks built in the first 20 years of the 20th century, and PE in schools. All of this helped build our economy, settle world wars, and create a sense of belonging and freedom in our society. If the 20th century was the American century, I would argue that it was in no small way because of youth and school sports. It helped make it happen. It's why we now see China and Saudi Arabia investing significantly in sport for all models, building facilities and new programs. And where are we now in the US? Well, numerically, we took a hit from COVID. Participation fell all the way down to 49%. We've rebounded to 55%, due largely to efforts by leading brands and organizations to raise awareness of the value of sports for kids and invest in programs for those left behind by an increasingly commercialized system that prioritizes children from families with the resources to pay thousands of dollars a year into adolescence. But as a nation, our youth sport participation rate is still below that of 2017 when the data was first captured. That rate has dropped as prices have skyrocketed 46% since 2019, according to our research. That's twice the rate of inflation. Now, we have new pressures bearing down on the games that children play. Private equity, chasing the $40 billion a year that families alone spend. They're rolling up clubs and facilities and companies that register the 30 million or so youth who play organized sports. Technology, which is turning kids into content from the moment they slip on a uniform. Advances in streaming mean that some kids today will have nearly every moment of their sports journey captured on video. Artificial intelligence will cut that up into highlights, and some adult will monetize it. Youth sport tourism, the investments made by cities into the construction of vast so-called megacilities with
Sorry, if
lots
we could wrap up here in just a moment. Thanks.
Lots of fields. Okay, and NIL, which is sponsor dollars, and that is pushing down the pipeline. Today's hearing uses the word crisis to describe youth sports, but I think the crisis is we don't have a plan to protect children and help all kids. So let me give you a few ideas that do not involve a whole lot of federal spending, if any at all, that can make an incredible difference in the space. Number one, collect better data. We can tell you how many states, there are 11, that hit the 63% mark. But that data is not collected and distributed down to the...
We'll have a chance to revisit these ideas in the 5-minute exchange.
Okay,
At this
sorry
point, I think we'll
about
have to go to our next witness. Thank you very much. Wonderful testimony. Now, next is Mr. Boyle.
Chairman Kiley, Ranking Member Bonamici, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. For more than 30 years, I worked as a school counselor and a multi-sport coach across the United States. I am now the co-founder and executive director of 241 Sports, a nonprofit that partners with schools and communities to expand access to youth sports and support healthy child development. While we are known for helping kids try new sports, much of our work today is in year-round school-based programming that reaches children from low and middle-income families who would otherwise have very little access. Earlier this fall, I met with leaders at the Pentagon from the Military Community and Family Policy Office to discuss how programming like ours could support military-connected families. Their focus on readiness, resilience, and well-being mirrors what we see every day in schools and communities. Frederick Douglass once said, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." For me, this work is as much about prevention as it is about intervention. When sports are placed inside schools, especially in communities with fewer resources, we reach children early, consistently, and before challenges become crisis. That is where youth sports can have their greatest impact. I'll tell you, though, that this work began as a very personal experience. When our now grown daughter, who's sitting in today's audience, tried out for a local travel soccer team, we were told she was their #1 prospect. But when I mentioned that at 8 years old, she was showing some interest in lacrosse, she went from #1 prospect to "we're no longer interested in your daughter." The message was clear: pick one path early or step aside. In essence, as the title of this hearing suggests, she got benched simply for being interested in another sport. That night, we came up with the tagline, "Life's too short for just one sport." And it reflects that what we see nationally, where too many children are sidelined because the pressure to specialize starts way too young or access to sports simply is not there. I get to see this from both the top down and the bottom up. This morning, here I am at a congressional hearing. But last night I was in Hartford at a program, and later today I'll be consulting to one of our school-based partners in Ward 8 right here in DC. And that perspective matters because I get to experience firsthand how policy impacts boots-on-the-ground practitioners. And I can tell you, it all matters. I often share an anecdote that plays out in many of the cities where we work. A teacher pulled us aside and said, "See that little girl over there? She lives in a shelter and was not coming to school until the program started. Now she shows up every day." But the teacher was clear. It was the program that brought her in. And once she was there, she was able to experience the full benefits of school. That is why we are so passionate about delivering programs in schools and communities and why we see the powerful ripple effects they can have. My biggest worry was never the school day itself. It has always been the hours between 3 and 6 p.m. when kids are dismissed, structure disappears, and too many are left to fill the time on their own. Children want a place to belong and something to look forward to. When that connection is missing, screens and other temptations quickly take over. Sending kids home and expecting them to find their way back to sports later is not realistic. Keeping them connected where they already are is the smarter and safer choice. Over the course of my career, I have learned that solving complex problems is rarely about working harder. It's about working smarter. I believe the most efficient and effective way to address the youth sports crisis and many of the challenges facing young people more broadly is to focus on schools and local communities as the foundation for youth sports. If we take seriously Frederick Douglass's call to build strong children, then early, school-based access to sport, especially in those critical outside of school time hours, is one of the most practical and powerful ways to do it. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll next recognize Ms. Van Dyke for your testimony.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Chairman Walberg, Ranking Member Scott, Chairman Kiley, and Ranking Member Bonamici, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me here today and holding this hearing. My name is Catherine Van Dyke. I'm a senior fellow at the American Economic Liberties Project and Berkeley's Civil Justice Research Initiative. I previously worked at the Federal Trade Commission, and for 2 decades, I represented small businesses and consumers taking on powerful corporate interests in court, including an antitrust lawsuit challenging Varsity Brand's alleged monopolization of all-star cheerleading. I'm here to sound the alarm about the anti-competitive consolidation of the youth sports industry. Youth sports used to be a great equalizer, where children from all backgrounds could learn teamwork and grit and build community bonds. Today, it has become the next victim of a financialized economy. Private equity is stealthily capturing youth sports, using the same playbook it has deployed in veterinary clinics, nursing homes, fire truck manufacturing, and countless other industries. Kids are burning out because of specialization, and injuries are on the rise. Families are going into debt, and it's based on a lie. 49% of parents believe their children will earn an athletic scholarship. In fact, only 2% of college applicants actually do. So what does youth sports look like today? Take 3-Step. It claims to be one of the largest youth sport event organizers in the country. It operates over 5,000 clubs across 7 sports and promises families, quote, immediate national brand recognition within the college recruiting landscape. Black Bear Sports Group operates over 40 hockey rinks across the Midwest and East Coast. A recent report by The Lever revealed that Black Bear is often the only game in town for hockey leagues and tournaments and forces parents into its streaming service to record games. Varsity Brands monopolized competitive cheerleading, as insiders put it, from bow to toe. So how did this happen? First, a private equity firm acquires competitors through hundreds of small acquisitions. Next, it eliminates competition through vertical integration so it controls the whole ecosystem. Finally, it extracts maximum profits from captive customers. In this case, parents who have to pay thousands of dollars for their kids to play sports. In short, private equity is turning what was once an affordable public good into a profit extraction machine. The numbers tell the story. Youth sports has grown into a $40 billion industry, roughly equal to the annual revenue of the NFL and all of college athletics combined. How did we get here? The 2008 financial crisis, slashed parks and recreation budgets, the COVID-19 pandemic delivering another crushing blow. Community programs have disappeared, and private equity is ready and eager and has filled the void. These firms control leagues, tournaments, venues, uniforms, tech platforms, and even governing bodies. They create a flywheel that extracts more and more revenue for wealthy investors, and trapped families have no choice but to pay. Here's the good news. Congress and our agencies can break the stranglehold that private equity has on youth sports. We can use our existing antitrust tools aggressively to stop anti-competitive mergers and roll-ups and break up monopolies. We can strengthen those tools by modernizing our laws to ban vertical integration, require transparent accounting practices, and stop corporate looting. We must ensure also that our antitrust enforcers have the funding, the staff, the resources, and the political support they need to go after bad actors. We must ban forced arbitration so parents and small businesses can enforce their rights, and we must modernize our antitrust laws to protect competition and give parents choices. In conclusion, our children deserve better than a childhood for sale to the highest bidder. They deserve a place where they can learn the importance of teamwork, fair play, and perseverance. They deserve an environment where sports is about joy, not profit extraction. And they deserve opportunities that are affordable. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And lastly, Mr. O'Sullivan is recognized for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman and committee members. My name is John O'Sullivan, and I've spent 5 decades in sports, first as an athlete, 3 decades as a coach on every level from 5-year-olds to NCAA Division I soccer. In 2012, I founded this organization called Change in the Game Project, and our mission is to put a little more play back in playing sports. So these days I travel extensively doing parent education and coach education and leadership development for youth and teams. And in my travels, I see firsthand everything that we're going to talk about today, from the 3/4 of kids that drop out to the injury epidemic and the financial burdens, because the business of youth sports is not set up to meet the needs of children in sports. And with this recent influx of private equity money and purchasing clubs and facilities, many of our children have just become commodities in sports. It's incredibly sad. But instead of reciting all this today, I just want to tell you all a story about a couple of teenage boys I met 10 years ago in Montrose, Colorado, because their story is what inspires me to do this work every single day. I was hired by the city and the Parks Department there to give a workshop on youth sports participation and coaching. And as the room filled up that morning, 5 boys walked in with an adult, and I just assumed that was their coach. And so I went over and introduced myself and asked them what team they played for. And they said, no, we're residents at the Robert A. Brown Center for Youth, which was a juvenile detention center for teenage boys. And during our workshop, in a segment about why children quit sports, each of those boys volunteered to stand up and talk about their youth sports experience. And they smiled about talking in love with soccer and basketball and football. And then their demeanor totally changed as they talked about why they quit. One couldn't afford to play. Another had a coach who never let him play a single play during an entire middle school football season. And a third told a story about horrible bullying from his teammates and a coach who just laughed along with them. Each of those boys quit sports, and they could each trace a direct line from the moment they quit and ending up in juvenile detention for theft, for substance abuse, and even assault. Once the positive influence of sports was gone in their lives, it was replaced by something far more sinister. And that's why I think what we're doing here today is so important. So I want to finish with this. The Reverend Billy Graham said, a coach will impact more people in a year than the average person does in a lifetime. And that's the power of influence. And I don't think I've ever been in a room in all my travels with the potential influence that the members of this committee have to bring attention to the sad state of youth sports and make a positive change. So I hope all of us today are aware of that influence and that we have to give sports back to our kids, put a little more play back in playing ball so that today's generation can have the same positive sports experiences that many of us did years ago. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the witnesses for that fantastic testimony. Under Committee Rule 9, we'll now question the witnesses under the 5-minute rule. I'll first recognize the chair of the full committee, Mr. Walberg.
I thank the chairman, and I thank the witnesses for being here. And Chairman, this is, and may I suggest to my good friend and colleague, the ranking member, that this is a hearing on school safety. I contend, as the witnesses have already today done so well, that if we did this right again, we would have less violence in schools. And as the last witness suggested about the youth facility that had former desirable athletes who were no longer desirable now in the youth facility, these are the type of things that will change the perspective of kids and what they do in life itself. And so this is a hearing on gun violence, etc., that goes on. Before I dive into my questions, I want to briefly mention a sports issue I've heard a lot about from constituents back home and some of my colleagues as well. Colleges are increasingly recruiting international student athletes, taking away important scholarship opportunities or participation opportunities from American-born kids. We need to make sure American kids have a fair shot at those opportunities. This may be something this committee will look at later, but today we're here to focus on youth sports. Mr. Ferry, I remember in the late 60s or the late 50s and the 60s, excitedly waiting to see what color baseball cap I would get for the Little League program and what t-shirt, not jersey, t-shirt I would wear, whether to say Athletics or Cubs or White Sox or Orioles, not the dreaded Yankees, and what team I would be on. In Babe Ruth League, we did get uniforms that we could wear, but we still had the enjoyment of playing with our teams. And we also knew that practice sessions meant we would have time on that field and we didn't have to fight for it like the rest of the week because kids were filling up the diamonds on the neighborhood and the parks. The league went from June through end of July. And then we waited for September and October for Pop Warner or CYO football leagues that went on, and they ended. That was life, and we all had a chance to participate and to fight to get on the the station wagon of our coach to the tailgate so we could drag our spikes on the way to McDonald's for a milkshake afterwards. That wouldn't be allowed today, I understand it. But that was youth sports, and it allowed all of us at a point in time, and most of us didn't go on to a college scholarship. We didn't go on to the pro leagues, but we had a wonderful experience. You mentioned that a family now spends over $1,000 on child's primary sport, up 46% since 2019. How has that cost increase hurt the affordable local programs that most American kids have typically depended upon?
Yeah, so what's happened, I appreciate the question. What's happened is we've had, when you were growing up, there were in-town recreation leagues, classmates playing with classmates, low cost, low barriers to entry. What we have seen is early forming travel teams, these tryout-based teams being created at earlier and earlier ages, all the way down to second grade or so. And once those are created, sport gets very expensive.
Yeah.
Goes from a couple $100 a year to several $1,000s a year. And when that happens, it peels away some kids, peels away coaches, reduces the number of kids in the local league. And by fifth grade or so, certainly the town that we raised our kids in Connecticut, the in-town rec league was gone. And you only had that travel team option going forward. And if you couldn't afford it, or if your family didn't have the 3 hours a day to travel kids and wash clothes and so forth, then you were kind of out.
And so now the kids filled their time with other things that were less productive, less enjoyable, and didn't prepare them for life. I want to jump over to Mr. O'Sullivan. In your testimony, you've written about many parents today who feel they have to chase expensive travel teams. How do you help those families see that that's not the case and encourage them to focus on the child's long-term development instead?
I think parents, what they need to do is begin at the end, right? What do you want out of sport? And I don't think anyone ever says, I want a child who's beat up, injured, burnt out, whatever. They want a healthy, functioning, high-character human being. And so that's what I say, begin at the end and then sign up for sporting programs and find coaches and find leagues that support that mission. And that the goal, the purpose is to develop a great human being. And then maybe the goal, if you have the luck and the genetics, you do well and you get a scholarship. Maybe you play at the next level. But it's really about human development first. And I think just a lot of parents are scared. They're scared that if they don't sign up, if they don't leave the rec league, their kid's going to get left behind.
From your lips to parents and God's ears, thank you so much. I yield back.
Mr. Scott, the ranking member of the full committee, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've, as previously been mentioned, we've been asking for hearings on gun safety in light of the recent shootings. I think those are even more important now. But in the meanwhile, I'll ask Mr. Ferry, you've talked about crime and health. Do you have studies that show that a student is more likely to graduate if they participate in sports?
Yes, students are more likely to stay in school, more likely to graduate, more likely to go to college, less likely to suffer a range of chronic diseases, everything from 13 types of cancer to on and on. And then they are generally more active adults, and because of that, they have more active kids.
And what about likelihood of committing crimes?
Yeah, there is a relationship. I don't have the data right in front of me. I can get it for you, but there is a relationship.
If you could provide us with those studies, that'd be helpful.
Happy to.
And Mr. Boyle, you mentioned the time between 3 and 6. Do you have studies that show the value of filling up that time?
I'm a programmer and a counselor, so I'm not great on the data. It's life experience and anecdotal. It's about what we see, and it's about what we know. There's certainly Tom's team's really good at getting the data for us for something like this.
Well,
but
you're talking about lessons like what teamwork means and sportsmanship?
100%. I mean, I think, as was alluded to, most folks here probably, I mean, at least I knew personally, right? I couldn't wait for the end of the day because I was going to be with my team. I was going to be with my coach. And I think for trying to create belonging and connectedness, there's nothing better than sports. And some of the kids we work with just don't get that opportunity.
Well, like the chairman, I played Little League Baseball growing up, and that meant a lot to me, so I know what you're talking about. Mr. Sullivan, obviously very relatively few people will be playing varsity level. How can we guarantee that others will have an opportunity to participate in sports?
Yeah, I think our goal in sport has to be to develop children to be active for life. And the statistics are around that, around after the age of 21, 91% of people's sporting pursuits are individual in nature. So one thing is not just the focus on team sports, but running, swimming, cycling, climbing, all these different things are really, really important sports to bring into kids. And just, yeah, I mean, I just think it's not just there has to be a pathway for the very best athletes, but then there has to be a place where the ones who are not on that pathway still move into community programming and become just part of the local rec league.
With the value of sports and recreation, traditionally, I think it's been alluded to, Parks and Recreation. I ran the Little League Baseball when I was growing up, and a lot of people had that opportunity. Ms. Van Dyke, what happened to Parks and Recreation? Why are we relying on private equity rather than public funds, Parks and Recreation, or public schools to provide these opportunities?
So as a result of the 2008 financial crisis, Parks and Rec budgets were slashed, and that really did leave a void where private equity firms came in and filled it with high-cost, flashy, elite club teams. And by filling that void, they were then able to continue to build their flywheel, where they gained control of the venues and the governing bodies and the apparel companies. And they really, and that flywheel also builds a moat that the community groups that my colleagues here are talking about can't compete with. They can't penetrate it because these private equity companies aren't just capturing the teams and the leagues, they're capturing the players.
Well, it seems to me that we got to get Parks and Rec and the public schools back involved so those opportunities will be there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. So growing up, my main sports were basketball and soccer. Unfortunately, I didn't make the freshman team for basketball. Still blame that on a late growth spurt. I played 1 year of freshman soccer, but wasn't good enough for varsity. I did end up playing tennis for all 4 years, although nowadays, to be honest, I play more pickleball. Don't tell anyone. The point is kind of like the ranking member was just saying. There's this sort of inherent winnowing process in a lot of sports. And so to follow up on Mr. O'Sullivan on your last answer, how do we maintain opportunities for young people of different skill levels? I think soccer does a pretty good job of this. You have rec and select and competitive, but even then sort of the rec leagues tend to winnow out as kids get older. So how do we make those opportunities more durable?
Well, I think it's, again, this education around what is the purpose of sport. And, parents ask me all the time, how does my kid make the elite team? And I think that's the worst word in sports is elite for little kids. And I just say, just change the name of your team. That's what everyone else does. Is they just call their team elite, right? I just think it's this thing that we have to keep as many kids as possible, as long as possible, in the best environment possible. The countries that do it best in sport development, they keep those kids. They're not making cuts at 6 or 7 years old. They're not forming competitive teams. And, I remember I had a friend who lived in New York City, an author named David Epstein, and he said to me, John, I live in Brooklyn, and I look out the window and there's a 7-year-old competitive travel soccer team practicing in the park across. He goes, and I find it really hard to believe that a 7-year-old team has to travel to get a competitive game in a city of 10 million people.
And Mr. Boyle, it seems to me maybe one of the issues here is the state of PE in our schools. Have you looked at that at all, to the extent to which there's a connection between robust PE programs and youth sports participation?
Yeah, it's interesting because we get the luxury of walking into lots of schools across the entire country, and there's no consistency as far as physical education is concerned. The patterns are just weird sometimes. You might get one PE class every 2 weeks, or maybe you do 2 weeks or 4 weeks of PE, and then you don't get it till the next year. And so and there's not always a focus on sport. And I get it. My PE colleagues would say there's more to physical education than just sport, but I don't think it has to be either or. I think that, schools can work in a way that teach fundamental sports skills so that kids have some confidence to perhaps do some sports outside of school time. And so I think there's an opportunity here to create some consistency around how it's being delivered and to recognize the value of sport.
Yeah, I think that's an important aspect of this, that is how a lot of young people get habituated and learn different sports and learn the value of physical activity. And Mr. Ferry, you had a couple other, I think, policy recommendations that you wanted to share with us. Do you want to take just a moment to go through those?
Yeah, and again, I appreciate for going along the first time. Number one, collect better data from the federal government. Push it down to the local level so folks can make decisions at a local level for what makes sense to them, right? Second of all, I would suggest that we register all youth sport organizations. You can't manage what you can't measure, right? The Safe Sport Act of 2017 requires that any member of an NGB or a national governing body register with the U.S. Center for Safe Sport and get their coaches trained in abuse prevention and pass background checks. The problem is that covers at best 1/3 of youth sport providers. I think all youth sport providers should be required to register with the center, and they should receive a benefit for doing so. Maybe it's free or discounted background checks or abuse training. I think that will reduce costs, level the playing field, and help manage a very messy landscape. Secondly, I think you can redirect the sports betting tax. So I'm not a fan of sports betting, but it's here and it's not going away, and it's raising significant revenue for the federal government, nearly $400 million last year in excise taxes. What if instead of that money going into the black hole that's the federal budget, that it went to closing gaps in youth sports, background checks, coach training, injury prevention, programs for low-income youth? Take from the treetops and give to the grassroots. Thirdly, I would recommend that you review federal investment criteria. So taxpayers already support local recreation through the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which uses proceeds from offshore oil drilling to provide municipalities with matching grants to build facilities. Educate states on ways to prioritize access to community sports. You can also use economic development assistance grants to build sport facilities, youth sport facilities. I think there's bipartisan support for that. And my final ask is please don't reform college sports without looking at the implications on youth sports, because anything you do at the college level in terms of employee status or NIL or sport offerings will have a downstream effect on youth and school sports.
Thank you very much. Representative Adams of North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Youth sports should not be a luxury item. They should not depend on how much money a family has or how far a parent can travel, or whether a private equity firm thinks that a field or a league is profitable. When kids play sports, we know what happens. They're healthier, they do better in school, they build confidence, teamwork, and resilience. But across this country, too many kids are being benched, not because they lack talent or interest, but because the system has become too expensive and too concentrated. A GAO study found that tight K-12 budgets are already limiting access to sports because schools struggle with transportation, facilities, and staffing. And at the same time, we're seeing private equity buy up leagues and facilities and equipment suppliers, driving prices up and pushing community-based programs out. That combination is squeezing families, schools, and small businesses all at once. So today I want to focus on who is getting left out and what role the public sector must play to make sure that youth sports remain accessible to all kids, not just those who can afford pay-to-play systems. So let me turn to our witness, our Democrat witness, Ms. Van Dyke. Let me say that a GAO study found that K-12 budgets have made it harder for schools to offer sports because of costs that are tied to transportation, facilities, and staffing. So can you talk a little bit about the role that public sector can play in expanding access to goods and services like youth sports, particularly through investments in schools, parks, and community-based programs as a counterweight to rising private costs?
Thank you for that question. I think that what Mr. Ferry has talked about and Mr. O'Sullivan and Mr. Boyle have mentioned are all really important when we think about how we get kids back in sports and how we make it accessible and affordable. Public funding absolutely is crucial to making sure that we have community-based and nonprofit-based and school-based programs. Because when we don't have those, what we have left is these really high-cost, monopolistic entities that aren't interested in growing their programs to make them affordable and accessible to everybody. They're simply interested in profit. They're interested in protecting their monopoly and driving cost up. That's why we see a $40 billion industry that is growing according to investment firms, but it's growing as participation is going down. What does that tell us? It tells us that they are jacking up prices and that they are solely focused on profit. And so when, Representative, you talk about community-based programs, we need that because we need programs that are focused on the growth of the children and accessibility, not programs that are focused on profit.
Okay, thank you. So, you know, we also hear a lot from families and small business owners in my district who feel like they're being priced out, not just of youth sports, but of the broader economy. So I want to zoom out for just a moment. Ms. Van Dyke, my constituents are deeply worried about small businesses. From your work on antitrust and competition, what are the main forces driving consolidation in the economy right now? And what policy choices have enabled that consolidation?
The consolidation is largely driven by a lack of enforcement and by a continuing growth of businesses getting bigger when you see businesses getting bigger and bigger. So for instance, the federal enforcers abandoned what's called the Robinson-Patman Act, and that prohibits price discrimination against small businesses. It's specifically designed to protect them. And in the last administration, that law was reinvigorated, but Chairman Ferguson at the FTC dismissed a lawsuit against Pepsi where Pepsi was specifically trying to, quote, advantage Walmart by driving up retail prices at small businesses so that customers would stay there.
So let me move on quickly. What policy tools should Congress be considering, whether through antitrust enforcement, support for community-based programs, or public investment to ensure that youth sports remain affordable, local, and accessible rather than becoming another profit-driven industry? Got 8 seconds.
We need to make sure that our agencies are adequately funded so that because they are tasked with policing our entire economy, we need to make sure that small businesses and consumers can adequately enforce their rights by prohibiting forced arbitration clauses and class action waivers. And we need to modernize our laws to take on vertical integration and serial acquisitions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Representative Miller of Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of our witnesses for being here today. We all agree daily exercise is vital for a child's development. President Trump was right to reestablish the presidential physical fitness test to help ease America's expanding childhood obesity rates. And I actually have grandchildren in a school that are preparing all the students in the school to take that test. We all know exercise has many benefits, greater focus in the classroom, and my personal impression is that our boys especially benefit from exercise. Lower risk of, they benefit in light of focusing on their academics when they're allowed to move more. That's what I mean by that. Lower risk of heart disease, cancer, stroke, and diabetes, lower recorded instances of drug abuse, greater development of eye-hand coordination, and improved sleep. Yet today, children are met with greater technological distractions. I think this is one of the issues of why we have less participation. Outside of school, the average child spends nearly 8 hours a day looking at a screen, whether that be through TV, social media, or video games. Parents are finding it increasingly difficult to have their children participate in sports due to rising costs. But also, the thing that I noticed over the decades when I was raising my 7 children is that if you did not get your child in club sports, like under 10, so age 6 and 7, they basically were left out. They didn't have that opportunity. And I hope one of the benefits from this hearing is that we start talking about the value of protecting family time. Children under 10 and families that have super young children should not have to forfeit their family time. Children should be allowed to have free time to engage with nature and in these family relationships, maybe even taking up an instrument or experiment. Which sport do I like you were saying, your daughter, just considering that she might want to play a different sport, sideline her, put her on the bench. These are issues that we should be talking about and making it difficult then for parents to get their children into the sports teams. Also, I am concerned about biological boys being allowed to compete in girls' athletics. So related to that, my first question is for Mr. Ferry. What is being done to address the growing crisis that young girls face in sports as they are forced to unfairly compete against biological boys?
So we are really focused on the 63% goal. How do we move from 51 to 55 to 63? So we've put most of our energy into the larger opportunities. The population of kids who are trans, it's very small. Doesn't mean it's an insignificant population, but we haven't put a whole lot of energy into that. I would say that we do have a position that every child should have an opportunity to play sports, and that we as a society should make every effort to give every kid a chance to play sports. But there are biological differences, especially once puberty hits, and there are very complicated equations about which sport and safety and health. We haven't weighed in on that necessarily.
Right, they are in the minority, but they're playing against the majority who parents or grandparents don't want their daughter across the net from a large biological male. That's a deterrent to the girls being in it. It's also dangerous. I do want to bring up another issue because we keep talking about access to sports for every child, for every family, and there are many home-educated children in our country that are meeting barriers because the states, I believe probably 20 states, refuse to allow home-educated kids to have access to public school athletic programs. And, the Tim Tebow law ensured equal extracurricular access. And I think that we should recognize that we have slammed the door shut unfairly to those students. And thank you, and I yield back.
Ranking Member Bonamici is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What a fascinating hearing. I appreciate all of you. I just want to make a comment at the outset in response to my colleague. Let me be clear that all students, including LGBTQI students and trans students, deserve access to and benefit from educational opportunities, including participating in sports. Ms. Van Dyke, you said in your written testimony, and you mentioned this, that 83% of parents believe their children have the talent to earn athletic scholarships. 49% are confident that they will, but in fact, it's only 2%. You have a citation there. I didn't get a chance to look into the details, but I mean, when my now adult son was in elementary school, he wanted to be an NBA player, but so did half of his classmates. I mean, we just don't have height genes in our family. But can you talk a little bit about where that expectation is coming from? Because your next sentence is that the industry's promises of more are puffery at best and deceptive violations of state and federal consumer protection laws at worst.
Thank you for that question. I think it's an incredibly underappreciated consumer protection issue within youth sports, that these organizations, Black Bear is promising exposure to college recruiters. There's an entire company called Perfect Game whose sole purpose, they serve thousands and thousands of athletes and operate in 40 states, and their sole purpose is the promise of expensive exhibition games for college recruiters to go to. Three-step also, it takes about 30 seconds of scanning through these organizations' websites to see these promises, and they can't deliver on them.
It's a fascinating issue. I'd like to follow up on that in the future. You were talking earlier in response to Representative Adams about the Robinson-Patman Act. So looking at the example of Black Bear Sports Group buying up youth hockey rinks across the country and then charging these absurd fees, what would antitrust enforcement look like in that that situation? And what would be the benefits to parents of student athletes?
I'll try to be brief, but there are a number of ways to take on this kind of consolidation by private equity. I think the first and most important is banning vertical integration in youth sports. There is absolutely no reason that the CEO of Black Bear Sports, who controls access to venues and owns hockey leagues, should also own the ranking system for those teams and players, and should also serve as a commissioner on a junior hockey league. Those are ridiculous conflicts of interest that allow, for instance, giving preferential treatment for ice time at the only ice rink in town to their teams. It allows them to they can create blackout rules that prohibit competitor leagues from holding events at the same time. That was one of the things that varsity was doing with.
Sounds like a tremendous amount of power.
Yes, it is an enormous amount of power. So I think that breaking up those companies using our existing laws and creating new laws that prohibit these conflicts of interest would be extraordinary.
Thank you. I also want to talk about the sort of crucial role of schools and infrastructure. So in the district I represent, I have a lot of urban areas. Mr. O'Sullivan's from Oregon, he knows Portland and Beaverton areas, but I also have a lot of very rural areas as well. So even something like school bus drivers, right? If there's a bus that's going to take students somewhere, school bus driver employment is down 10%. What's going to happen for students who are hoping to engage in these extracurricular activities if they don't have that vital transportation, especially in rural areas? Many kids are going to be left out. So do you agree?
I absolutely agree. There is a huge participation gap between low-income and high-income families. Certainly, a parent who has a job where they have to work on the weekend or at nights can't drive their kid to school or might not even to their game and might not even have access to a car. They certainly can't afford to play at expensive out-of-town tournaments at diamond-plated youth sports facilities. So I think it's absolutely right to be thinking about this in that context. And also going back to what Representative Miller talked about early, creating these community-based programs protects family time. So I think I think that this is a bipartisan issue that we all need to
I think so too. Mr. Ferry, you recently stated to the New York Times that there is a great demand for kids to play sports and parents will spend money they don't have. So what sacrifices have you seen parents make to afford all the expenses associated with athletics, registrations, equipment, travel, lodging?
They pay what they have to. We love our kids. We will do just about anything for them. And many of us are under the impression that if our child at age 8 is scoring a bunch of goals, then they might actually have a chance at getting a scholarship or preferential admission to selective universities. This is a big motivator in middle and upper income families as well. They're presented with a system that is dysfunctional at best and broken at worst, and they're responding to it. They love their kid. I spend very little time blaming parents. There is bad behavior, but they just love their kids.
I appreciate that. And as I yield back, Mr. Chairman, I want to note that at the end of this month, there's a lot of families in Oregon and across the country who are going to see their healthcare premium skyrocket if we don't take action this week, and I hope we can do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Moylan of Guam is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Kelly and Ranking Member Bonanici. Thank you for hosting today's hearing on youth sports and looming crisis before us. Participation in sports can have a real benefit, bringing communities together, increasing self-confidence, and getting kids active. I just remember growing up in our village down in Guam and Tumon, how fun it was with the neighbors to go to our baseball field and just have a great time until you hear your mom calling and it's getting dark and we had to go back in. But it was really exciting. And at a time when Americans' youth are struggling both physically and mentally, the withdrawal from our youth from sports is especially troubling. According to Georgetown University, 24% of the U.S. population ages 2 to 17 experience obesity. A 2023 CDC survey found that 29% of high schoolers experience poor mental health and 40% experience symptoms of depression. And a data brief from NCHS last year found that more than half of all the teenagers have 4 or more hours of daily screen time. Concerningly, a 2025 Research Center report details that nearly half of all teens think they spend too much time online and that social media harms people their age. So in short, we're seeing more and more of American youth retreat from the real world to the virtual world. And while we can all recognize the benefits of the internet, it will be dangerous for us to ignore the harms it can bring and the impact it is having on our youth's mental health. Youth sports offer an active, engaging, and a fun way. As long as I remember as a kid, as long as I caught the ball or hit the ball, it's a fun way to counter these concerning health trends. Participation in youth sports has been linked to better academic performance, lower rates of anxiety and depression, lower risk to future illnesses, including heart disease and diabetes, improved sleep, and a greater likelihood of physical activity as adults. Additionally, in 2023, American Heart Association paper found that 80% of the youth athletes were within the normal weight range and only 15% experienced obesity. So, Mr. Ferry, the State of Play report briefly touches upon the health benefits of youth sports. Can you please elaborate more on that and touch upon the benefits of youth sports, especially among communities disproportionately impacted by these health crises?
Yep. So the research is clear. 20 years ago, we didn't have this, but now it's all put together in one infographic that we talk about within Project Play. Physically active kids are 1/10 as likely to be obese. They're more likely to stay in school. Girls are less likely to get pregnant. They have physically active kids have lower drug use rates, higher binge drinking rates. So the data is not all good, but it's mostly good. They go on to college, they're more likely to be active parents, and they're more likely to have active kids. So this incredibly virtuous cycle can be unlocked if we can simply get kids off the couch without running them into the ground, through overuse injuries, year-round play, et cetera.
Thank you. Anybody else like to chime in, please?
I would just add that, first of all, thank you for your statement to start, Congressman, because you just supported our life's work. So, and I would say that we walk in parallel worlds here, right? At least in my universe, I do. Middle income America, what we're looking at is trying to get kids to not specialize, but you go 1 or 2 zip codes over and it's an access problem. And so if we're worried about the issues that you're talking about, we have to figure out a way to go where the kids are, and the kids are at schools. And so I'm less worried about the travel program stealing these kids, because that would be a luxury for them. I think we need to be smart and efficient about how we access them and really think through what are the policy changes we can make so that there's a greater opportunity. The chairman asked about physical education. A lot of the teachers we hire to deliver our program or our programs are physical educators. But what we do is sports is the best place to teach the skills of social emotional learning, how to manage your emotions. I was both hyper competitive and wired anxious as an athlete. And I suffered from anxiety in my 30s at the point where I developed panic attacks. And it was debilitating and embarrassing and all those things. Now I talk about it openly because we treat it as a sports skill for kids. If you can calm yourself down when you're in an anxious state, you're a better athlete. If you can calm your anger down when you're hyper competitive, you're a better athlete. So sports are the best opportunity to teach these skills of mental health, in my opinion. And I think there's an opportunity here, especially in our underserved and under-resourced communities, to go there and do that kind of programming.
Thank you. We're all on the right track, and I think that will make even better for our national defense with the people that join our armed services with that mindset there.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, yield back.
Representative Gralva of Arizona is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. I would argue that it is the lack of investment in public school programs from elementary to high school that have opened the door to these private equity firms. Having served on a school board, Southern Arizona's largest school board for 20 years, the push not only from the federal government, but at our state level to take cuts away from the classroom, PE teachers and all of those what a lot of people think of outside of the classroom and unnecessary are the first things cut. And we all know that's wrong. But when you have limited funds, you have to direct them, where you need to. So all parents want the best for their children. I'm a mom of 3. We do everything we can for those babies. But it's because the options at our public schools have been decimated. Because of chronic disinvestment, many look to private programs that really hit families in their pocketbooks. This creates a larger divide of families that can pay to play and those who can't. The T-ball, youth programs, those that have been discussed here, especially those in our communities, are run by committed volunteers and parents who do fundraising as much as they can. Same is true for school-based programs and other community programs. I hope that the push the chairman spoke of and in his introductory remarks about the increased push for participation means more federal funds dedicated to school-based programs. And, I do want to thank Mr. Ferry for not taking the bait about trans youth participating, and that this is a conversation about all youth having greater access. I really appreciated that. My first question, or depending on how much time I have, my question will be to Ms. Van Dyke. In your testimony, you explained that private equity firms have been drawn to youth sports over a number of factors, highlighting competitive cheer from bows to toes, and that parents want to provide their children the best opportunities and are captive in vulnerable market. While wealthier families have resources to afford exorbitant costs associated with team registrations, travel, lodging, athletic camps, where does that leave low and middle income families who also want the best opportunities for their children?
It leaves those lower and middle income families out. And that's an important fact here today to talk about, not just in terms of youth sports participation. We've heard a lot about how it reduces obesity and keeps kids out of trouble with the law and gets them into college. It gives participation in sports also creates an admission boost. There was a study that came out a few years ago that showed that the highest earning families' children had a 24% admission boost to elite universities directly related to their family's ability to pay for them to participate in sports.
Yeah. Do any of the other witnesses want to add something into that question?
I would just, building on your point about the value of schools, it's PE, but it's also the structure of school-based sports. One of the problems we have here is there'll be 80 kids who try out for the boys basketball team, and 15 will make it, and 9 will get playing time, and we end up structurally pushing aside, not just you, Mr. You understand this better than anyone else.
Yeah.
We structurally push aside kids because of our traditional structure of school-based sports. But there are models out there where they're creating multiple teams. You might have 2 freshman teams or 3 JV teams.
Yeah.
We need to move to an environment where the supply of experiences meets the demand for them. And that's partly a function of schools rethinking their model.
Yeah, thank you. And also that means more resources. You need more uniforms. I mean, all of it ties to resources, really. Mr. Boyle.
Yeah, I think also it's thinking about early access. I mean, I think when we don't always define youth sport, and everybody has their sort of own age group that they might have in their mind. We do a lot of work at the elementary level, especially in the cities, because what happens is a lot of times if kids haven't had exposure, when they get to middle or high school, they just don't have the confidence to try out. And in the TikTok generation, no one wants to show up on somebody's screen or YouTube of having gotten their ankles broken or whatever they might say. Yeah. We have to teach kids skills so that when they actually get to those settings where they have an opportunity to try, they know. We go places, kids don't know the rules. They hit the ball and they don't know where to run, right? They don't know where first base is. So if we don't do early access to sports in a smart way, we're going to lose a whole generation of kids who will never try it because they're just afraid to.
Right. Or you have young people who've been playing t-ball since they could hold up a little bat, and you get to an area where you're like, these kids have been playing 5 years, and
exactly.
You're in 3rd grade. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I'll yield back.
Representative Owens of Utah is recognized.
Thank you so much. This is such a very, very important topic, and we're really fighting for the culture of our country through our kids, and I appreciate everything you guys said so far. I was just on the way in this morning, I read an article about a college player who was entering the portal because the coach called him lazy. That is a prescription for failure. If we don't teach our kids that we don't run away from hard, we run toward it, and we gain those life lessons. So I just appreciate this particular topic, and I appreciate this committee really taking it on full tilt. I've learned some of life's best lessons of playing sports, learned the concept of teamwork, of respect for others, leadership, and where grit comes from. It's understanding that you cannot control the scoreboard, but you can control the hustle. These lessons, once learned, set us up for success regardless of our endeavors. Children need the opportunities that youth sports provide to establish healthy habits and muscle memory before they reach adulthood. As youth sports moves further out of reach for students and families, some children will lose critical chances to develop lifelong skills and character. They will miss out on those lessons that are so valuable, that were so valuable in my life. So I want to thank you guys again for this conversation. Mr. Ferry, when you had your opening statement, you were going through a list of things, and I don't know, I hope I didn't miss it, a list of things that you thought would be important to kind of get us back on track. Would you mind just, if you haven't already done that, make those statements or finish the conversation you were having?
Yeah, I was putting ideas on the table that won't cost no new federal spend, but things we can do to organize the money that's sloshing through the system in a better way. One was collect better data so folks in Utah or elsewhere down to the city level can make decisions like, okay, only 40% of kids are playing, and here are the different groups, and here are neighborhoods. How do we organize against it? How do we pull philanthropy into this? How do we develop better field use policies? There's a real opportunity for local communities to drive change themselves. So it is not true that government does not fund youth sports. It funds youth sports through the building of a lot of facilities, and that includes municipal facilities. All these for-profit clubs and nonprofit clubs are using public facilities, but we're not asking them to have criminal background checks or abuse training or coach training or injury prevention or access. We're not giving discounts. Municipalities have a real opportunity to create the kind of environment that they want to have locally. But we got to give them data, and we got to give them tools to how to use the power of the permit.
Okay, thank you so much. Mrs. O'Sullivan, you mentioned in your testimony, you've praised initiatives like the Soldiers to Sidelines that train returning military veterans to coach. What makes veterans a natural fit for youth sports coaching, and how can local leagues reach out to this type of leadership and to discipline and bring discipline to their programs?
Thank you. It's such a great question. So we know that when we have trained coaches, kids stay in sports longer. They're more likely to return and retain them. And so, yeah, there's a nonprofit called Soldiers to Sidelines that I've done some coach education work for. And what they are doing is they're taking these men and women who have served our country and that we've spent millions of dollars training on leadership and discipline and physical fitness and all that. And then they come back, and so many of them say, but how can I continue to serve? And so what Soldiers to Sidelines is saying is, hey, you can serve your country by going back to your community and coaching. And what an incredible resource that we have in our country that we've already invested in. And so just on that way out saying, hey, can we connect you where you're moving back to a program and become a coach and give back and give back to all those kids and show also what it means to be a military member. I mean, I think it's such a underutilized resource, and it's right there for us.
Well, thank you so much. I'll just say this. We can do everything right. We can shut down the border, bring down prices. We don't get our kids to understand and understand grit, teamwork. We'll end up losing the whole process if we don't keep that up. So, and I would just say this, some kind of way we have to get our parents understanding that their kids are not the lotto ticket. We have too many kids. We have too many coaches that see their kids as something that is going to give them a big badge or big certificate. We need to be teaching character. So we'll get back to that. This is a great voice. I appreciate you guys doing this. In some kind of way, we'll see if we can help out on the federal side some kind of way. So thank you so much. Now you're back.
Representative Hayes of Connecticut is recognized.
Good morning, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. I have to say before I start, although it's not this subcommittee, but the full committee, I heard the comments from the chair of the full committee about this hearing actually addressing school safety. And while sports are important for school safety, we have to have a hearing on this committee to address school shootings and the safety of our children in American schools. To have woken up on December 14th, the 13th anniversary of Sandy Hook, to yet another incidence of school-based violence and shooting, and for this committee to have done nothing is beyond irresponsible. I sent a letter on September 12th, and while the chair has informed me that my comments were, quote, noted, as a member of this committee, I expect something more, and the American people, and I know that my constituents expect something more than just to normalize school shootings and teach our children how to shelter in place. So with that, I'll move on to the topic of this hearing. Mr. Boyle and Mr. Ferry, welcome from Connecticut. It was a little bit colder here this week. It feels like Connecticut, not typically what the weather here is like, but thank you so much for your work in this area. Previously, children in communities across the country could participate in local recreational sports programs regardless of their family's income. Unfortunately, today, that is no longer a reality, with private equity firms rapidly buying up youth sports leagues, training programs, recreational facilities, and even the software programs used to register youth athletes. With each purchase, costs rise and families are left with fewer options. If you want to have a productive conversation about declining youth sports participation, we have to really be honest about what is really driving families away, and that is affordability. Parents are opting out of youth sports because they're being priced out. There are not that many available options that are free. Private equity firms are raising costs at a time when families are already struggling to make ends meet. What was once a community activity has become a multi-billion-dollar for-profit driven industry. Mr. Ferry? Mr. Ferry, according to the Aspen Institute, youth sports generated about $19 billion in 2022. Despite rising costs for families, the industry did not just grow, it skyrocketed to roughly $40 billion, nearly doubling its annual revenue in only a few years. As a teacher, I've seen so many of these kids who did not make one team, but travel leagues were not an option because their family could not afford the equipment, the fees, the time commitment, all of those things, and they truly believed in their kids and wanted the best for them. In your testimony, you acknowledge that parents are being priced out of youth sports and private equity firms have played a growing role. How can participation grow when the price to play continues to rise and families have nowhere else to turn?
Yeah, I appreciate it. By the way, we raised our kids in Connecticut and understand everything you're talking about. Again, I think part of the equation is helping municipalities understand that they have some say-so over this. They have the ability, through the power of the permit, through the use of these fields, renting out these fields under certain conditions. You could say to local groups, terrific, we'll rent this to you, but also show us that, like, you've got X number of kids, a percentage of your kids who are low income, or, free and reduced lunch, however you define it, or you're serving kids from the community and not kids from all over the county, and you're taking our best playing fields. So I do think there's a level of local control. I also think it's a matter of schools fully appreciating the value of sports. So if sports do develop students cognitively, educationally, academically, why are we building the whole model around the kids who are just the very best athletes, or who are the early starters? If it's really valuable, shouldn't we create opportunities for every kid to be physically active in the school, whether the school providing that opportunity or having a partnership with a local park and recs or other community groups in the area to connect them to experiences that they could have?
Thank you. My time is almost expired, but you reminded me of many a time where the quarter was about to close and kids knew that a game was coming up, and that if all of their assignments were not completed in my class, that they were not. It created this relationship where kids understood they were student athletes and the academics came first. And I saw so many of the kids who were passionate about sports thrive academically because they understood that they had to do well in the classroom in order to even play on whatever field it was. And it just created an amazing symbiotic relationship between myself and those children and their families. With that, I yield back.
Representative Lee of Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am actually really glad that we're talking about youth sports because I, for one, as somebody who availed myself of youth sports when I was in school, I recognize how important it is that it is more accessible and more affordable. But we also know that when school budgets are tight, sports, just like arts and debate and other extracurriculars, are usually the first things that are on the chopping blocks. But we also know how important they actually are to children's development, as academics and these things really do go hand in hand. My worry is that this administration's efforts to defund public schools and their protection of corporate interests all but guarantee that children's extracurricular activities will be outsourced to private equity and reserved exclusively for those kids and those families that can't afford it. Because even when schools do have robust athletic programs, we already know that poor kids, kids from marginalized communities, are already falling behind their wealthy peers who typically, and now as we see kind of this movement of these private sports, AAU club sports, right? Those kids are starting at around 4, and poorer kids are not able to access those sports sometimes until they're in junior or high school. But it's also making it wildly inexpensive for everybody, where these expensive private programs are running $40 billion and have a $40 billion corporate monopoly that have no real regard for these kids' health or their well-being. Corporate sports leagues either box low-income kids out entirely, or they use the empty promise of free higher education to coerce families into spending exorbitant amounts of money that they don't have for their very young kids to specialize in extreme training for one sport, committing their lives to something that will generate billions in revenue that they'll never see, sacrificing other parts of their lives to follow this one path that has only ever been available to a small fraction of students. Let me look around. Ms. Van Dyke, in your testimony, you shared a survey that showed 83% of parents believe their children have the talent to earn them an athletic scholarship, but only 2% of college applicants actually receive them, and most don't even cover full tuition. Do elite youth sports companies use predatory tactics like the promise of college scholarships to recruit families into their programs?
They absolutely do. It's really easy to look at their websites and their promotional materials to see those promises. And they have to make those promises to justify the high costs that they're charging those families. And those high costs are the result of consolidation. It's not just youth sports where consolidation makes prices go up. Study after study, a study from the Census Bureau a couple of years ago, a study in 2015 by John Quokka, a study in 1989, all show that when mergers and consolidation are allowed to happen, prices go up, wages go down, and small businesses close. And that when we actually enforce our antitrust laws and stop these mergers, prices go down, employment goes up, and small businesses succeed.
Yeah, thank you so much for making those various connections there. Your testimony refers to youth sports turning into a profit extraction scheme. How you've mentioned how these markets are shifting through the consolidation, through the lack of any sort of antitrust laws, and as with all sectors, right? When youth sports are taking over by corporate monopolies, they don't prioritize, or no longer are at least able to prioritize the benefits to participating. And as we've heard from the other witnesses today, sports benefit children's development. They teach invaluable skills like social emotional learning. Mr. Boyle, as the executive director of an organization that offers school-based sports programs rooted in social emotional learning, I know you mentioned it briefly, but would love if you could share the connection between youth sports and why SEL is so important.
Yeah, and again, and it's all kids. It's like all kids benefit from the skills of SEL, right? And because sports is the best place for teaching these things because the emotions happen in real time. And so, a kid standing over a putt, a kid about to take a penalty kick, a kid about to take a free throw that matters. Those are life skills you can teach in real time. I was a school counselor, and so I would always be told, hey, you got to go in and do a lesson on anxiety or anger management or conflict resolution. It was a heck of a lesson.
Yeah,
you know what impact it had? None. The next day, it was gone. We wouldn't teach piano once and say, good luck, have at it. Now you're good at it. you have to continue to teach these skills and use the opportunity of sports when those emotions are happening in real time to say, all right, this is how you can deal with this right here in a safe and fun place, so that when you're about to road rage or lose it on somebody, you've developed those skills in such a way. Sports is the best opportunity to do that, and we miss out on so many kids if we don't give them access to sports.
Thank you. That's my time. I appreciate the testimony today. Sports is something that I value, but the connection between antitrust, these monopolies pushing kids out of sports and creating an industry that I think is not having the outcomes we want is really important to talk about. So thank you so much for your time, and I yield back.
I'll now recognize Ranking Member Bonamici for her closing remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and truly thank you to the witnesses today. It's been a very informative hearing, and I know we'll be thinking and talking about it in the days and weeks to come. For millions of children across the country, participating in youth sports brings them joy, promotes teamwork, friendship, improves physical and mental health, gives students a place to hone their talents, discover new interests, foster lifelong friendships. But unfortunately, we know that the rising cost of youth sports, especially during an affordability crisis, is presenting a barrier for too many families. I wanted to note on the conversation about PE in schools that we here in Congress do not set curriculum. That's not what we do. However, we know over the years that those decisions made at the local level there are federal policies that affect those, and one of those is No Child Left Behind, which was well-intentioned. But what happened, and I'm urging us not to go back to those days where we put test scores in a place of acting as a punitive tool. What happens when there's too much emphasis on test scores is that all of the courses that are not tested are cut. And we saw that with arts, with music, with PE, with social studies, with everything that's not reading and math. So I'm very much encouraging us to keep an open mind that a well-rounded education that includes PE and humanities and arts is what students really need, especially today. We cannot, test our way out of this. If we can't have schools just focus on test scores because they're not going to be enhancing and providing classes like PE. We also know that without sustained investment, it's going to be harder for local organizations, school-based programs, nonprofit organizations that previously ran youth sports. They're going to be left without sufficient resources. And I'm concerned about the cuts in federal funding that are going for the existing federal programs right now. Companies like Nike, which is located in the district I am proud to represent, they have, they do product donations, community grants, and that's really helpful, but there is still a tremendous void. And that's why the private equity firms are swooping in and buying resources, programs, fields. Some of your testimony, Ms. Van Dyke, really highlighted how serious of a problem this is. And now they're able to charge high prices for what should be a quintessential childhood enriching experience. Too many students are left out. No family should have to choose between supporting their child's education and perhaps their dream, but also the benefits of PE and youth sports. They shouldn't have to choose between that and paying their bills. We must do more to counter private equity's outsized role in this industry. We must encourage local and federal investments so youth sports are accessible and affordable for all students. We have a wonderful partnership in the Tualatin Hills Parks and Rec District, for example, with our schools in Oregon. That's a partnership between a local Parks and Rec District and school districts. We need more of that, not less of that. We need to make youth sports accessible and affordable for everyone, not just those from wealthy families. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for the hearing. Thank you to the witnesses, and I yield back.
I think it's well understood that far too many young people don't have the best diets, aren't getting enough physical activity, aren't spending enough time outside, are spending too much time on screens and in isolation. And youth sports is a solution to a lot of those problems and can set off a virtuous cycle of positive lifestyle choices with tremendous benefits for kids' social and emotional development. So I want to thank all of our witnesses here today for the role that you're playing in helping to set off that virtuous cycle for many, many kids across the country and to restore the role of youth sports to the place it should have when it comes to the upbringing of kids in our country. I think this hearing today, we've identified a few areas where we could see improvement. One is just programmatic in terms of having more offerings for students to continue to be involved regardless of skill level, having maybe more robust PE programs in schools. The second is financial, removing the barriers to entry that have gotten just exorbitant in many communities across the country. The third, I think, is cultural, just trying to re-establish a culture that is supportive of play and competition and giving kids these opportunities from an early age. I do have to say, a few witnesses mentioned the experience of COVID, where we took this opportunity away from many kids. In my state, we were the last to allow youth sports to continue again. I took part in what we call to let them play rallies with kids across our state. And that was a period where the interests of young people were not the highest priority when it came to policy, and this was one manifestation of it, and we really must never make that mistake again. That's a broader issue, but on this specific issue of youth sports, I think we've had a lot of bipartisan agreement today. I hope that this forum can serve as an opportunity for those of you who are here today as witnesses to continue and to amplify the tremendous work you're doing. So thank you for being here today. I'd like to thank everyone again for their participation, and without objection, there being no further business, the committee stands adjourned.
In today's video, Scott Besson sat down for an interview with Fox Business and issued a major update regarding tax returns. Also, the vice president did a press conference in Pennsylvania and took questions from the media. Please like this video, share this video, leave a comment down below, and please do not forget to subscribe. Let's start here.
Maria, let's go back. The One Big Beautiful Bill was passed on July 4th, but for working Americans, it was retroactive to the beginning of the year. Most taxpayers did not change their withholding. So as a result, we're going to see very substantial 100 to 150 billion of refunds in the first quarter go directly to Americans' pockets. So the sooner they file, the sooner they'll get them. Our estimate is it could be 1,000, 2,000 per household, depending on the number of workers.
Wow, that is a big deal. So, Secretary, you've talked about this additional money from the tax code that we're getting. You talked about the impact of the Big Beautiful Bill. It sounds like you think we're going to get a real economic boost for the macro story in the first or second quarter. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I think it's going to. They start lifting off in the first quarter and the second quarter. And, you know, Maria, the other thing, when I started my career on Wall Street in the 80s, people used to focus on trade. Were we building more in the U.S. or were we importing more? We're seeing the trade deficit drop, too. So the trade deficit drop means more production in the U.S. So I think that's something that economists are going to have to start looking at again, thanks to President Trump after 40 years.
Okay, so that is a huge announcement from Scott Besson, and it's one that is supported by data. You guys could look it up yourself. It's already being estimated that Americans are going to receive somewhere between 1,000 or 2,000 extra than what they normally would receive during tax season, which brings me to the bottom line up front here. All this craziness regarding the state of the economy and the polls that continue to show the American people believe we're going in the wrong direction. I guess the question here is, how will they feel once the money hits their bank accounts? I mean, I think that's interesting, right? The biggest tax refund in history is upon us. And I guess we're going to see how the American voter reacts. Now, let's hear a little bit more from Scott Besson. Take a listen.
We have very good momentum coming into next year. The economy is broadening out. You can see it. Other sectors of the stock market away from big tech are doing very well. But if they try to shut down the government, I believe that the Senate Republicans should immediately forego the filibuster, keep the government open, and let the economy do its thing. Because the One Big Beautiful Bill, there are so many parts to that are kicking in. We've had 15% uptake in capital expenditure. Capital expenditure historically always leads to job growth. We had the president fulfilled his promises to working Americans, no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime, and auto deductibility for American-made cars. There are going to be substantial refunds to working American households in the first quarter. They will change their withholding. They will get an increase in real incomes. So I am very optimistic that for working Americans, for job growth, for capital formation, but we cannot let the Democrats shut down the government.
Well, the issue is that it's not about letting the Democrats shut down the government. The Democrats will shut down the government like they just did previously. And then what they'll do is they'll shut it down and say Republicans are the ones who shut it down. That's the way it works politically. And if Republicans want to avoid a government shutdown, then they should just meet the demands of what Democrats are asking for by extending the ACA subsidies. I mean, that is the political reality. Now, I don't believe in these subsidies. I believe the system is broken already. I think we did have an episode talking about the ACA subsidies in depth, and my whole solution was that it should be extended for 12 months, but they should write the language in a way that you cannot extend it after that, no matter what. They should make it law that the ACA subsidies will officially expire, and the current Congress is not allowed to extend it any further. And what they should do in those 12 months is reform the healthcare system to fill in the gaps and the holes that has been created because of Obamacare. Let's listen to this first question from a reporter asking the vice president, what is his grade on the economy?
President Trump last week gave his economy a grade of A+++++. What grade would you give the economy today?
A++++. Look, here's the simple fact of the matter. Again, you have to understand all of this stuff in context. What you have to ask yourself, what has the Trump economy been able to build over the past 10 or 11 months, given what we inherited from the Biden administration? Ladies and gentlemen, we had the worst inflation crisis in 50 years in the United States of America under Joe Biden. We had the worst trade deficit in the history of the United States under Joe Biden. We had debt and deficits, the highest in the history of American peacetime in 250 years. What we have been able to do, higher wages, lower inflation, a massive amount of investment and money coming into the United States of America, that stuff is incredible. And that is something to be proud of. What I will say is that given how bad things got under the Biden administration, we're going to keep on working every single day to make sure that Americans feel the benefits of the Trump economy. I am certain that we've already seen great benefits for the American people, but we got a lot of rebuilding to do over the next 3 years. And the president is committed more than anybody to making sure that we do.
So what do you guys need to know if you don't already see it? The White House, and this is my own personal opinion, of course, it's speculation, but I have the belief that the White House is banking on tax season. They've already addressed energy, okay? Now, if your electricity has been going up, that has nothing to do with the president. That has everything to do with your governor. I know that firsthand because when you live in California, it doesn't matter what the president does. Governor Gavin Newsom, or should I say Gavin Newscum, has a particular hold on California and refuses to do the right thing for the people of California. There's no reason why gas in California is $6 a gallon. And if there is a reason, it's because they've created that, okay? We already know that electricity prices in California continue to go up. Okay, I want to put this on the screen because it paints the picture here of what I'm telling you. That sometimes it has nothing to do with the president. It has more to do with your local elections. Okay. Golden State Exodus, Valero to burn $1 billion just to get out of California. You want me to say that again? They're willing to throw away $1 billion just to leave that state. California just lost another giant, and this one came with $1 billion receipt. Valero Energy is reportedly taking a staggering $1 billion loss to shut down and exit California by April 2026. So this is quick, right? This is a matter of what, 4 or 5 months, rather than comply with the ever expanding mandates pushed by Governor Gavin Newsom and his regulatory agencies. Let that sink in. One of the largest energy companies in the country looked at Sacramento's rules did the math, and decided it was cheaper to walk away than play along. Okay, let's go to this clip from the vice president. This is another question that they posted.
With 69 News, WFMZ. The jobs report you mentioned this morning, you said 60,000 jobs were added in November. However, it also said 100,000 jobs were lost in October, and the unemployment rate currently stands at 4.6%, which is the highest since the pandemic. So my question is, how do you inspire companies to hire people if people don't have jobs? Income tax cuts aren't going to help them.
Well, first of all, the idea that income tax cuts don't help is ridiculous. If more people have more money to spend in their pocket, that's good for businesses, it's good for families, it's good for everybody. It's one of the ways why we do this. When you talk about 100,000 jobs, you're talking about government sector jobs, and that is in a lot of ways the entire story of what we're trying to do under President Trump's leadership. We want to fire bureaucrats and hire these great Americans out here. That's what we're trying to do.
Let's go to this sponsor. So Lear Capital. If you guys have been following me for quite some time, you guys know I talk about them very often because I myself am a product of what they're teaching. I believe in precious metals. I have gold myself, and